Hey, what's up? So last week I had a bunch of leftover roasted pork from my Cuban sandwich video and kind of by accident made an al pastor taco that was both better and easier than any other version I had made at home. And at some point it also kind of became like carnitas, and those two things together are very dope. So today I'm gonna show you how to make the meat, the salsa, and the tortilla from that taco, and I'm calling it carnitas al pastor. To get started on the carnitas part of this taco, I need some pork. From the shoulder specifically, this is a 3.5 pound or 1.5 kilo bone-in pork butt. And just like I did for the Cuban pork a few weeks back, I'm gonna cut 3 to 4 2-inch deep slashes in each side so that I can get this big muscle properly seasoned with salt. It might be tough to get a deep cut around the bone area. That's no big deal, just get it as deep as you can. And once we've got scores on both sides, next comes the salt. A bunch of it, if I had to guess, maybe 2 rough tablespoons or 2 very strong pinches of coarse salt per side. Once this is salted well on all 4 sides and on the ends, now we're gonna cure this in the fridge for as little as 2 hours, but as long as 24 hours. The next day, when I pull this pork out of the fridge, you can see the flesh has firmed up just a bit and it's no longer wet looking, and that's gonna be great for roasting. Speaking of which, I'm gonna preheat my oven to 250F or 120C and then grab my 6.5 quart Dutch oven and snug the pork up inside. The lid goes on, and then I'm gonna throw this into the oven and roast it for 6 to 8 hours until it's all succulent and tender. And at this point, if you're wondering, hey Bri, what if I can't wait 6 to 8 hours to roast this pork? I hear you, and this will work just fine in a pressure cooker in a pinch. So to do that, grab your pressure cooker and move the pork over into that. Then 2 cups of stock or water goes in, and then I'm gonna cover it and cook it on high pressure for 1 hour. Once that meat is done cooking, I'm gonna let that pressure release naturally for 30 to 45 minutes. And after 1 hour 45 total in the pressure cooker, there we go. Now we've got tender pork that is gonna be ready for the second half of this video. I do wanna call out that since this meat is essentially gonna get steamed in the pressure cooker, there won't be any delicious deep roasty flavor that we get in the oven, and that's fine in a pinch, but I really do prefer the oven. Now, after 6 hours of slow roasting in the oven, this shoulder is ready to be checked on. I know it's done when I stick a fork in there and it meets very little resistance. The meat should want to shred apart like this. Another classic indicator is the shoulder blade. If you can easily pull it out, then you've got tendy pork, bro. Next, I'm gonna let this meat rest up for a little while we finish the rest of our taco prep. And to keep things from drying out while it's resting, I'm gonna press this muscle down into the juices and rendered fat. The lid's gonna go on, and this is gonna go out of the way while we make some bright, tart tomatillo salsa. For that, I'm gonna grab something wide and flat to cook it in this case a 12-inch saute pan, and into that I'm gonna measure 450 grams or roughly 1 pound of chopped and cored ripe tomatillos. Underripe tomatillos are super acidic and make for a punishingly tart salsa, so the way to find out if they are ripe enough is to basically squeeze them. They should have some nice give to them like this, and yeah, that feels pretty soft. It should be kind of like a baby's head. We also need to remove the little stemmy butthole thing that's not gonna cook down in the salsa, so while you're cutting these into chunky thirds, just zip that right out. Behind the tomatillos goes 125 grams of small diced red onion. I went for a clean small dice here because the salsa is not going to get pureed, and I really don't want rustic, large, undercooked chunks of onion floating around in my salsa. Behind that goes 50 grams of small diced poblano pepper. I've removed the seeds because I'm not a spicy food tough guy, but if you are, go for it. And from there, again, I like to make this into a clean small dice just like the onions because the shape is going to show through in the final salsa and we want it to look pretty. Behind the poblanos goes 3 garlic cloves that I've pushed through my garlic press, and then 5 grams of salt. I'm going to take this pan over to the stove and put it on medium-high heat. At this point, I recommend adding in 50 grams of water. My test batches of salsa used tomatillos that had a lot more water in them than the ones I'm showing you here, so I didn't think extra water was necessary when I went to film it, but it definitely is. After about 2 minutes of cooking and stirring, the tomatillos should start to get a little bit juicy like this. And now to continue cooking and steaming these down into salsa, we're gonna cover this with a lid and then turn the heat down to medium and cook for 10 to 15 minutes more, stirring every 2 to 3 minutes. After that 15 minutes, these tomatillos should be pretty saucy and quite broken down. Everything else, including the onions, the garlic, and the pepper, should be pretty fully tender at this point as well. If things aren't tender at this point, just keep going. Add a little bit of water if it looks dry and cook for another 5 to 10 minutes. The final salsa should be just a little bit loose, but still kind of jammy, and everything should be well combined, and I think this looks excellent. So now I'm going to transfer this over to a little deli container so that we can cool it off for taco time. Up next, no taco is complete without a thoughtful, fresh, larded tortilla. For that, I've got my food processor here, and into the jar of that, I'm going to measure 250 grams of dried masa flour. This stuff is available in most grocery stores, and it's made from corn that has been cooked in lime or nixtamalized and then dried out and ground down into flour. Masa flour is a great place for beginners to start with corn tortillas. In the long run, making fresh masa yourself is actually probably the most pro way and the most delicious, but this product makes delicious tortillas, and fresh masa is its own thing, and that's a video for another day. Behind that masa flour goes 3 grams of salt and then 30 30 grams of lard. The lid goes on, and now with the chopper running, I'm going to stream in 260 grams of room temperature water. You could definitely make this tortilla dough in a bowl without a machine, but I find it easier to combine lard and flour electronically with the food robot. Once everything is well combined, I like to check the hydration of this dough by grabbing just a little bit and giving it a firm squeeze in the palm of my hand. It should come together into a nice little nugget of masa without being dry and crumbly, and that looks good. Now I'm going to flip this over into a medium bowl, and then with both hands squeeze everything to combine into a monolithic hunk of nixtamalized corn. Now I'm going to cover this with a slightly damp towel while I press and cook these tortillas. I'm also going to grab a preheated non-stick pan, aka Brian's Comal, over medium-high heat. Now I'm going to grab my tortilla press and a digital scale. I got this wooden tortilla press at my local Mexican grocery store, and I'm pretty sure it was made from pine bought at the Home Depot, but it does work, and it was like 25 bucks, so I'm stoked. Now to press these out, I'm going to pinch off a small chunk of masa dough and weigh it out. I'm going for about 40 gram size pieces here, so I'm going to tear that down and then roll it up in the palm of my hands into a little dough ball like this. Over at the press, I've got 2 squares of parchment paper going down. Wax paper will work here as well. The tortilla ball is going to go down on the lever side, and then that's going to get topped with that second piece of parchment. From there, it's press time, and in my experience, a slightly wetter masa dough will make a thinner tortilla, and a drier dough will yield a thicker one. I prefer a thinner tortilla personally, but a wet masa dough is actually a lot harder to slide off the paper, so beware. I know this dough's in a good spot because it easily comes off the paper, and it looks pretty thin, so now into the pan it goes. These tortillas are going to cook for roughly 30 seconds per side. I like to cook them just until they are well set up and starting to take on some golden spots of color like this, then it gets flipped. This gets cooked for another 30 seconds on the far side, and once it's fully set up, into the tortilla warmer it goes until it's time to eat tacos. In total, this recipe should yield anywhere from 10 to 12 tortillas, and I highly recommend giving it a try sometime if you've never made fresh tortillas. They are so deeply corn flavored, and just that little bit of lard makes them really savory. Okay, now it's taco time. First step is to get something non-stick preheated. In my case, it's a 14-inch non-stick saute pan that I got from an online restaurant store, and I highly recommend it if you don't have something big like this. I cook most of my meals in it. Now, I'm gonna preheat this over high heat. While it comes up to heat, I'm gonna grab the resting pork that we made earlier, and then I'm gonna move it over to a little baby sheet tray so that I can do some very light shredding to it. Basically, we want pieces that are gonna be taco friendly once they're refried like carnitas. So to do that, we're tearing down the larger pieces, but trying to keep them kind of chunky at the same time. Once it's all broken down into chunks, now it's time to fry it up. So over at the hot pan, I'm going to squeeze in a generous amount of neutral oil, probably about 3 to 4 tablespoons, and then I'm going to add in 200 grams of diced pineapple. Pineapple is one of the signature flavors of this taco, and it brings kind of a savory, sweet, tropical vibe that is super fun, and I am very excited to eat it with pork in a taco very soon. After about 45 seconds, that pineapple should have gotten a really good sear on it and should be taking on some color like this. From there, I'm going to add in half of that pork that we just pulled apart. The other half can be fried up in batch 2 with another 200 grams of pineapples if you're making tacos for a crowd, or you can freeze it and use it for future use Taco Tuesday. Once everything's tossed well to combine, now we're going to make an effort to spread this pork out and push it down into the pan. We need lots of surface area contacting the pan because carnitas are all about crispy fried pork, and that crispness comes from oil and meat touching together in a hot place. After about 2 to 3 minutes, this pork should have taken on a lot of browning and crispness, and at that point we're going to toss it a few more times and then continue to sizzle this until everything has a good amount of this crispy fried pork going on. Once that's looking good and fried up, now to make this taste like real al pastor, the next thing that goes in is about 175 to 200 grams or roughly 1 cup of al pastor marinade. To make that marinade into a high-sided container goes 200 grams of water, 30 grams of achiote annatto paste, and if you're not familiar, achiote annatto is a red brick of ground seeds and spices that essentially is the flavor of al pastor. It's piquant and kind of hard to describe in terms of taste, but it is a must-have. If you can't find the achiote annatto paste, I would say try and find annatto seeds. Both should be available in a Mexican grocery store. Behind that goes 50 grams of diced pineapple, 50 grams of orange juice, 8 grams of chili powder, 3 grams of cumin, 20 grams of sugar, 3 grams of garlic powder, 5 grams of salt, and 20 grams of white distilled vinegar. The immersion blender goes in, and now everything is going to get pureed until it's well broken down. The batch size here should cover all of the pork that we roasted earlier, or 2 full batches in the saute pan. Once we've got about 175 grams grams of that al pastor marinade in with the pork and pineapples. We're gonna give everything a toss to combine. This pan should still be very hot at this point because we need this puree to reduce, caramelize, and glaze this pork. If you see any chunks of pork that need a little bit more saucing, go ahead, be liberal. Make sure you get those little guys covered all the way. And once the meat's all glazed up and looks delicious like this, now we're gonna take it off the heat. And this stuff tastes as red as it looks. It's super savory and undeniably both al pastor and carnitas at the same time. Now, to build this into a taco, of course, the first thing down is gonna be my floppy, warm, fresh tortilla that we just made. Behind that comes a generous amount of that carnitas al pastor straight out of the pan and steaming. Behind that, some jammy, tart, cooled down tomatillo salsa. Make sure you go liberal there. I really am happy with how this turned out. And now to keep things clean and simple from here, I've got a hefty pinch of fresh cilantro and fresh chopped red onion. And finally, we're gonna top this off with some crumbly, clean, milky queso fresco. Usually, when you combine two complicated things that taste amazing on their own, like carnitas and al pastor, you'll get a mess of flavor and texture that is less than the sum of its parts. But damn, you guys, these taste very good, and anyone can make them. They're super easy. Let's eat this thing.